Good evening, my friend. Tonight we will not talk about kings and battles. Instead, we will talk about something closer to everyday life: food. We will go back quietly to the Middle Ages and ask a very interesting question. What was the real difference between a peasant's dinner and a noble's feast? So, for now, just relax, let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine yourself slowly walking through the twilight of a medieval village. You push open a creaking wooden door and step into a low, cramped hut. This is your home. The walls are woven from wattle and daub, sticks and mud pressed together by hand. In the centre of the single room, a small fire flickers in a shallow hearth, licking at a few smoky logs. This is the only source of light and warmth in the entire house. Your stomach growls. You've worked since sunrise, and now it's finally time for dinner. Your wife brings you your plate, although it's not really a plate at all. It's a thick slab of dark bread, baked days ago, so hard it feels more like a wooden board. This is a trencher, a bread plate. It's practical and cheap. It can hold your food, soak up the juices, and if you're still hungry at the end of the meal, you can eat the plate itself. With a wooden ladle, she scoops something thick and sticky from the big black pot hanging over the fire and pours it onto the bread. This is your main dish, the same almost every night. Pottage, a heavy grain and vegetable stew made from oats or barley or rye, simmered for hours until the grains burst and the whole mixture turns into a gluey porridge. Floating in it are a few limp leaves of cabbage, some leeks, some onion from the tiny garden behind the house. If you're lucky, there might be a scrap of fat or a bone to give it flavour. You tear off a softer bit of fresher bread to scoop it up. This is the everyday reality for the majority of people in medieval Europe. The air smells faintly sour, like steamed grain and slowly boiled vegetables, with a hint of smoke from the damp firewood. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine that the world tilts beneath your feet. The dim hut melts away, and suddenly you're wrapped in warm golden light. When you open your eyes, you are standing in the great hall of a stone castle. High on the walls hang bright tapestries. Dozens, maybe hundreds of candles burn in iron chandeliers, turning the hall as bright as midday. A long table stretches the length of the room, covered in clean white linen. In front of you there is no dark, rock-hard loaf, but a shining pewter plate. The air is thick with smells you have never encountered before. The rich, smoky aroma of roasting meat, the clean scent of burning oak wood, and, under it all, a strange, warm sharpness that makes your nose twitch. The scent of spices from very far away. This is a noble's dinner. You watch as servants carry in huge platters an entire roasted deer, the skin crisp and brown, the fat shimmering in the candlelight. On the table sit soft, snowy loaves of white wheat bread, so light they almost crumble when you touch them. There are silver cups filled with deep red wine. These two tables, the smoky peasant hearth and the glittering noble feast, might be separated by only a few fields and a patch of forest, perhaps a few 100 meters of earth. But in social terms they are worlds apart. Tonight, our story will walk the distance between those two tables, slowly, step by step, until the gap between them starts to feel smaller, and your thoughts grow quieter and sleepier. Let's begin with the simplest and most important food: bread. In the Middle Ages, bread was not just food. It was a statement, a badge you carried in your hand. The colour, texture and taste of your bread silently told everyone who you were and where you stood in the social order. As a peasant, your bread is made from the rough stuff: rye, barley, oats, sometimes mixed with ground peas or beans to stretch it further. In bad years, when harvests are poor, You might even add ground acorns or whatever filler you can find. The loaf is dense, dark, and sour. When you break it open, you can see bits of bran that the miller never bothered to sift out. It fills your stomach and keeps you going through long days in the fields, but it takes effort to chew, and it sits in your belly like a stone, and every step of its journey to your table reminds you of power. The best wheat you grow doesn't belong to you. It goes first as rent and taxes to your lord. What's left you must take to his mill, because you are not allowed to grind grain at home. The miller will take his fee in flour. By the time the bread is baked, every authority above you has taken a bite. On the other side of the social line, the Lord's table is piled with white bread. This is made from the finest wheat, sifted again and again until only the pale inner part of the grain remains. When it comes out of the oven, it is soft, airy, and fragrant. To nobles, white bread is not only tastier, it symbolizes purity and nobility. They believe coarse, heavy food belongs to coarse, heavy bodies, and that refined bodies, their bodies, deserve refined bread. The obsession with colour and purity goes so far that there is another, almost cruel category of bread: horse bread. This is made from the worst scraps, bean flour, chaff, leftover husks, and is intended for animals. But in years of famine, when even rye is too expensive, the poorest people eat it too. The hierarchy of bread perfectly mirrors the hierarchy of people. Ironically, if you ask a modern nutritionist, your rough, whole-grain loaf, with all its fibre and B vitamins, is far healthier than the noble's soft white bread. But medieval people live with different dangers. Dark, damp loaves can harbour ergot, a toxic fungus. Eat too much of it and you risk St. Anthony's fire, convulsions, hallucinations, even gangrene. White bread, stripped and sifted, is less likely to carry such poisons. So in a twisted way, the unhealthy-looking bread of the rich sometimes protects them from very real dangers of the time. History rarely lines up with modern logic. Now, look back at your own hearth and that ever-simmering pot above the fire. This is your main dish, pottage. Think of it as an eternal stew, never entirely emptied, always topped up. The pot stays warm day and night. Each day your wife adds a little something. A handful of oats, a few cabbage leaves, a chopped onion, yesterday's stale bread, and, if fortune smiles, a bone, a bit of lard, or a stolen egg. Some days the stew tastes thin and watery. Other days it feels almost rich. Over time, it becomes a living record of your family's fortunes, a liquid diary of what the land has given you. The base is grain, cooked until the kernels burst and thicken the broth. The vegetables supply a whisper of vitamins. Meat is rare. When it appears, it's a small celebration. Now, shift your gaze again toward the Lord's kitchens. They too serve pottages and stews, but theirs have fancy names and complicated recipes. One noble dish might combine wheat cooked in rich meat stock with milk, egg yolks, sugar, and saffron, turning the whole pot golden. Another might be made from pounded chicken or fish mixed with breadcrumbs, almonds, egg yolks, and spices until it turns into a silky, almost creamy paste. These are not just survival foods, they are culinary performances. After your simple supper, you step outside your hut. The night is cool and the sky is pale with stars. Not far away, a dark forest looms, mysterious and inviting. You know there are rabbits, birds, and wild pigs in there. You know there is wood for your fire and branches for your roof. And yet, to you, the forest is both treasure chest and trap. You live in England, under the harsh web of the forest laws. In medieval legal language, a forest is not just a place full of trees. It is any area the king has claimed for royal hunting. Woodland, moor, meadow, and even farmland. After the Norman conquest, roughly a third of England falls under forest law. The purpose is simple: to protect the king's game, mainly deer and wild boar, and the vegetation they rely on. The rules are severe and strange. You may not hunt in the forest. You may not carry a bow there, because that suggests you might hunt. If you own a large hunting dog, it must be lawed. The front toes partly cut so it can't chase deer. You may not fence your fields if it might block the animal's path. You may not cut trees or even collect fallen branches. Those too belong to the king's deer. Punishments are harsh: heavy fines, prison, mutilation, and in earlier times, even death. One of the most chilling rules is called bloody hand. If a forester catches you with blood on your hands or clothes, you can be judged a poacher, even if no carcass or weapon is found. Proof flows only one way. So you stand outside your hut, staring at the forest, knowing that the food and fuel that could make your life easier are only a few steps away, yet hidden behind an invisible wall of law. For the Lord, the forest is a playground. For you, it is a field of temptation and danger. Now the scene shifts again. You are no longer the hungry peasant at the forest's edge. You are a young noble, dressed in fine wool and fur. Dawn has barely touched the sky when your servants wake you. Today is a hunting day, a major social event. This is no quiet, solitary stalk through the trees. Courtly hunting is a carefully choreographed spectacle full of noise and ritual. You and other nobles gather at the forest border, where tents and tables have been set up. You eat a hearty breakfast while the chief huntsman reports on yesterday's scouting. He shows droppings to estimate the deer's size and age. Plans are made. Then the hunt begins. Sleek scent hounds, guided by a specialized handler, track the chosen stag. When they catch the trail, horns sound across the woods. More packs of dogs are released in relay, waiting at key points like living nets. You and dozens of riders thunder through the trees. Every stage of this chase has its own vocabulary. Medieval nobles develop an elaborate language of the hunt. Different words for deer of different ages, different terms for the stag's antlers, haunches, and organs. Special verbs to describe how the hounds move, how the deer runs, how the final blow is struck. Mastering this language is part of being a gentleman. It's a code, a kind of verbal costume that clearly separates you from peasants who might hunt for food but do not speak the aristocratic tongue. To you and your peers, hunting is not mainly about getting meat. It is about courage, control, camaraderie, and display. It's also, quietly, a form of military training. Riding over rough ground, reacting quickly, coordinating as a group. As real warfare changes over the centuries, and knights matter less on the battlefield, nobles pour more of their identity into this ritualized pursuit. If they can no longer prove their nobility in war as often, they will prove it in the forest. When the hunting party finally returns, the castle kitchens are full of fresh venison and boar. But what else is on the noble table? To answer that, we go back to the earth, to vegetables, the humblest of foods. Behind your peasant hut lies a tiny spinach green garden. It is not for decoration, it is your lifeline. You grow what is practical: cabbages, leeks, onions, garlic, turnips, and parsnips. These crops yield well, survive poor soil, and store safely in a cool cellar through the winter. They are the backbone of your pottage. Without them, hunger would bite much deeper. But when these same vegetables are delivered as part of your rent to the Lord's household, something odd happens. Many of them vanish from the noble plate. Medieval elites often look down on vegetables, especially roots that grow underground. In their mental hierarchy, foods closest to the sky are most noble. birds that fly, then animals that run on the ground, then fish in the water, and last of all, plants that hide in the soil. You are what you eat, they think. Noble bodies should be built from high light foods, game birds, tender venison, root vegetables, heavy and earthy, belong in peasant guts. Even the way people think about health supports this idea. Imagine you are now the Castle physician, trained not in modern biology, but in the humoral theory of Hippocrates and Galen. You believe the human body is ruled by four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, each associated with hot, cold, wet, and dry. Health is balance. Illness is imbalance. Every food also has a humour profile. Fish are cold and wet because they live in water. Beef is cold and dry. Fire, cooking methods, and spices can shift these qualities. Frying or roasting adds heat and dryness. Boiling adds wetness. Your job is to recommend dishes that balance your lord's humours. If he is too cold and wet, you prescribe foods that are warm and dry. So fish should not be simply boiled, you advise. Better to fry or roast it to counter its cold dampness. Beef, being cold and dry, is better stewed in broth and served with moist onions. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips are said to create gross humours and uncomfortable gas. One ancient doctor praises parsnips' warming powers and even claims they strengthen a man's virility, but warns they are hard to digest. Someone suggests mixing them with honey to soften their harshness. To modern ears, much of this sounds absurd. But for medieval elites, it is cutting-edge science, the best framework they have. And because only nobles and clergy can afford medical books and personal doctors, this food philosophy becomes a mark of status in itself. You, as a peasant, have no time for such theories. Your diet is much simpler. You eat what keeps you alive, yet bits of humoral thinking seep down as folk wisdom. Cold illnesses need hot foods, soup for fevers, hot drinks after getting soaked in the rain. The echo of ancient Greek medicine quietly shapes village kitchens. Now, let's follow a single grain of black pepper across the map. It begins as a green berry on a climbing vine in India. A farmer picks it, dries it in the sun, and hands it to a trader. The peppercorn travels by sailboat across the Indian Ocean, moves by caravan through deserts to ports in the eastern Mediterranean, and from there on to Italian ships bound for Europe. Every time it changes hands, its price rises. By the time a few peppercorns are sprinkled on a lord's roast, they are worth more than the meat beneath them. In medieval Europe, spices are luxury items, second only to gold and jewels. They are expensive not because meat is rotten, that's a popular myth, but because the routes are long and dangerous, and because Muslim and Italian merchants tightly control the trade. To use spices freely is to flaunt wealth. Some spices are so valuable that a pound of nutmeg might equal the price of several oxen. Dock workers receive cloves as part of their wages. To guard their profits, traders invent wild tales about spice origins. Pepper forests guarded by venomous snakes, cinnamon sticks stolen from the nests of giant mythical birds. Europeans repeat these stories with a mix of fear and excitement. When a noble host showers meat with spices, he is also showering it with legend. Among these spices, there is one we now treat as ordinary: sugar. For medieval nobles, sugar is not just sweetener, it is medicine and prestige, used like cinnamon or ginger. It is costly, imported from the Islamic world, and sold in pharmacies. According to humoral theory, sugar is warm and moist, perfect for balancing certain conditions. Cooks drop it into soups, sauces, and meat dishes. The ideal high-status flavour is not purely sweet, but a complex balance of sweet and sour, built from vinegar, unripe grape juice, sugar, and spices. A noble meal is a sensory storm. The dazzle of gilded dishes, the smell of roast and cinnamon, the burn of spiced wine on the tongue. Eating becomes theatre, and like any good theatre, there are special effects. Between courses, servants carry in fantastical creations called subtleties, sugar sculptures, edible illusions, and cooked animals rearranged into impossible shapes. A roasted swan is carefully redressed in its own snowy feathers, its long neck posed as if still alive. A monstrous cockatrice appears, half pig, half goose, stitched together and roasted until the seam all but disappears. It is an edible myth, proof that the Lord can command nature itself. Another favourite trick is the singing pie. Bakers make a giant hollow crust and, just before serving, slide live birds into the space beneath. When the knife cuts the crust, the birds burst out, wings beating wildly, filling the hall with chirps and gasps of laughter. The pie is barely eaten. Its job is to astonish. Of course, with food comes drink. As a peasant, your everyday drink is small ale, a weak beer brewed from grain and water. Brewers soak malted barley in hot water to draw out the sugars. The first, richest liquid becomes strong ale for the rich. The second and third washings are thin and mild. That is what you drink, a cloudy, yeasty, low-alcohol liquid that tastes faintly of grain and herbs. It gives you calories as well as fluid. Children drink it too, because in some places, especially crowded towns, water sources are polluted by waste. In the countryside, where streams and wells are cleaner, water is still used regularly, but ale is safer in some situations and more filling. Medieval beer tastes different from what we know today. For much of the period in England, brewers don't use hops. They flavour ale with a mixture called gruit, a blend of herbs like yarrow, bog myrtle and others. Hops only become widespread later, bringing with them the bitter, resinous flavour we associate with modern beer. Nobles, meanwhile, have access to strong ale and to wine. In northern lands, wine must be imported, so it is expensive. They drink it straight, or mulled with spices and sugar into heating, fragrant beverages believed to help digestion and balance the humours. Records from monasteries and castles sometimes list daily rations of up to a gallon of beer or ale per person. Taken at face value, it makes medieval life sound permanently drunk. In reality, most of this is small ale, more like liquid bread than modern lager. People drink for energy as much as for pleasure. But for nobles at a feast, there are certainly nights when cups are refilled too many times and songs grow louder than prayers. Sometimes, however, no amount of wealth can protect either peasant or noble from hunger. In 1315, rain begins to fall across northern Europe and does not stop. Spring is cold, summer is wet, and grain rots in the fields. Hay cannot be dried, animals go hungry, and so do people. This is the Great Famine. Grain prices soar. Bread vanishes from markets. Even kings struggle to feed their households. Edward II of England reportedly travels through areas where there is not enough bread to buy at any price. When the rich begin to fear hunger, the poor are already in crisis. People eat roots, weeds, tree bark. They peel off the inner layer of elm or pine, dry it, grind it, and stretch their dwindling flour with this bitter dust. Tree bark bread keeps the belly from gnawing itself, but offers almost no nourishment. Over the course of several years, perhaps a tenth or more of the population dies. Starvation is a terrible equalizer. Social differences remain. Rich people still have better chances than poor, but the normal rules of the dinner table blur. At other times, the menu is changed, not by weather, but by faith. According to church law, Christians must observe many fast days. The longest is Lent, the 40 days before Easter. During this period, people are supposed to abstain from meat, eggs, milk, butter, and cheese. Only fish is allowed as animal protein. For you as a peasant, that means your already plain pottage becomes even plainer. A few pickled herring, dried and salty, may be all the luxury you can add. For nobles, however, fasting rules become another opportunity to display creativity and wealth. Lords stock fish ponds on their estates, raising carp and pike. They import rare sea fish from the coasts. Their cooks grind almonds with water to make almond milk, a milk substitute that can thicken sauces and soups without breaking church rules. They shape fish into mock meat dishes, and meat into shapes that look like fish, playing with the boundaries of what is permitted. The definition of fish itself becomes flexible. Beavers live in water and have scaly tails, so some theologians decide that at least the tail counts as fish, making roasted beaver tail a pious treat. A strange northern goose, whose nesting grounds are unknown to medieval Europeans, is rumoured to grow from barnacles attached to floating wood. If it comes from the sea, people reason, it must be fish, not fowl. And so, for a time, some happily eat barnacle geese during Lent until church councils step in to stop the loophole. Without refrigeration, everyone, rich and poor, must learn tricks to keep food from spoiling. Salt is your closest ally. When your one pig of the year is slaughtered, the meat is cut into big chunks, rubbed over and over with coarse salt, and hung in the smoky rafters above the hearth. The salt pulls water out of the meat, and the smoke coats it with chemicals that slow decay. The resulting bacon is tough but long-lasting, and its flavour brightens endless months of cabbage and oats. Fish are salted and dried until they are hard as boards, then soaked and cooked when needed. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut, shredded and layered in crocks with salt until lactic acid bacteria transform it into something sour and durable. Nobles use these methods too, but they add refinement. Meat slowly cooked and stored in its own fat as comfit, duck legs buried under a blanket of solidified grease. Clear, jewel-like meat jellies created from long-simmered bones, clarified with egg whites and poured over carefully arranged chunks of meat and vegetables. The gelatin locks out air and preserves the contents, while also dazzling the eye. Making such jellies is laborious and fuel-hungry, another quiet signal of status. At last, return with me to the castle's great hall at the end of a banquet. The guests have eaten and drunk their fill. The music is fading, the candles burning low. The tables are littered with bones, crusts, and half-finished dishes. But the story of this food is not over. In noble households, there is a system for dealing with leftovers, and it is as layered as the society itself. A special officer, often a cleric, is responsible for alms, charitable distributions. During the meal, a separate alms plate is kept on the table. From each course, the best portion is placed on it, untouched. This is God's share, reserved for the poor. After the feast, good but partly eaten meat, the half-devoured roast, the cut pies, is collected and given to respectable but struggling townspeople, those who have fallen on hard times but still maintain some social standing. The trenchers, those thick bread plates soaked with gravy and sauces, are gathered and handed out to ordinary beggars waiting at the castle gate. To them, these greasy slabs are rich and filling. What is left, bare bones and scraps, goes to the hunting dogs. A single feast thus feeds many layers of society. If you are one of those poor souls standing in the cold outside the gate, waiting for the alms officer, the moment he presses a meat-soaked crust into your hands is both blessing and reminder. You are grateful. This bread may be the difference between eating and going hungry tonight. But you are also reminded that your survival depends on the leftovers of someone else's abundance and charity. For the Lord Giving away scraps is both religious duty and political performance. Christian teaching praises almsgiving. Feeding the poor is a way to care for your soul. At the same time, regular, organized charity displays your power and kindness to everyone watching. It transforms surplus food into social stability. When the poor line up, heads bowed, accepting what is given, they are also silently acknowledging the Lord's place above them. Food ties everything together: faith, power, fear, and hope. It builds bodies, but it also builds hierarchies. The difference between peasant and noble is written in the grain of bread, the depth of the stew, the spices on the meat, and even in who eats the leftovers. And yet, beneath all these differences, everyone is doing the same simple thing: trying to fill an empty stomach, trying to stay alive one more season, trying to believe that tomorrow there will still be bread on the table. Now, as these images slowly fade, you can let go of the crackling hearth and the crowded hall, the salty ale and the spiced wine, the sour pottage and the shimmering roast. Let them all drift back into the past where they belong. Your own room is quiet. Your own breathing is slow and steady. Somewhere in that distance between the hut and the castle, between black bread and white, your thoughts have softened. If you feel a little heavy, like a loaf cooling on a wooden board, that's all right. You can let your mind grow quiet, like a kitchen after midnight when the fire has burned low and the pots have finally stopped bubbling. The feast is over, the bowls are empty, and it is time now simply to rest. Good night.